Hey, Damon DiMarco here for CreateX3.com. Recently, I was at a party and somebody asked me, I know you've published a number of books. How did you get to publish your very first book? And I thought, well, that's a pretty good story. And then I thought, why not just make a video about it? That's what the whole internet's for. You can just kind of make a video and send it out there. So today I'm going to tell you how I published my first book with the hopes that it helps you publish your first book. Before we begin, please hit subscribe and ring the bell down in the little thing right here. Join us also at CreateX3.com. You can sign up for our newsletter and let's get to it. After graduate school, I moved into New York City. That was June of 1996. And I worked for a long time as a professional actor, regional theater, industrial films. I did some primetime TV.
Docket number 07115, People versus Julio Rodriguez, murder in the second degree, burglary in the second degree.
I also did a lot of daytime TV.
Look, the guy had me in a chokehold, okay? Truman was a loon.
You don't want to help me, do you?
I don't want to be on unemployment. I don't want to work security at the mall, and I do not want to lose my pension. That's what I don't want.
I was a classically trained actor who had done a lot of martial arts as a young man. And so I was one of the go-to guys here in the New York City area I was a stuntman, basically.
Come on, punk!
On a soap opera, when they said, can you speak these lines, can you play this part?
Hey, how'd it go?
Take a guess.
Oh, that's not good.
And oh, by the way, we're going to have you punched or kicked or assaulted or something like that.
When you see your mama, you give her a woman too.
And you get to hit back and that sort of thing. I was like, great, sign me up.
Now I owe you one. How's that feel?
I was once set on fire. I've fallen off buildings. It was a pretty good life.
There have been days I would have eaten cream corn out of a bum's ass for $2,500.
But then September 11th happened, 2001, when the two airliners were hijacked and flown into the old Twin Towers. If you were alive back then, you remember what a disorienting time it was. I was living in an apartment share. One of the people living with me at the time was an old college friend of mine, and he had been down by the feet of the towers. He had an appointment there that day, and so he got caught up in all of the ruckus. We feared that he was lost. All that day, the death toll kept coming in, and we thought that he had been lost. He walked back into our apartment covered in dust from the towers. He looked like a snowman, and we were happy to see him. He was in shock, I think is safe to say. And we put a drink in him and sat him down on the couch, and we asked him to tell us what happened. And as he was relating this incredible experience that he had, I thought back immediately to my undergraduate years. I did my undergraduate degree at Drew University in Madison, New Jersey, a fine liberal arts school, excellent liberal arts school. And during my freshman seminar, mine was about ancient history. We had a professor, we called her Professor Sally. That's what she wanted us to call her. She was not a buttoned-up intellectual. She was a hands-on, laid-back, cooler than ever human being. And she had us reading Thucydides, the history of the Peloponnesian War, and Suetonius, the 12 Caesars, and Livy's history of ancient Rome. And during that time, I was also exposed to the Roosevelt slave narratives, where during the 1930s, during the Great Depression, they paid journalists to go out and interview the last African Americans who had been slaves. Slavery was repealed in the 1860s. And so some of these people were still alive. They were elderly by that point, but they still had these recollections of what had happened. And they would talk to these journalists and they would tell everything that had happened to them. And that's why today we have this invaluable trove of information where this era of human history that was right here in our country, slavery, was set down not in some kind of dry pronouncement like slavery happened, this is what slavery was. No, you heard it through the voices of the people who had been there. Yes, you heard about how awful things were, and everyone needs to hear that, I believe, but you also heard this is how they endured. And it spoke to me on a human level. You know, writing, every time I think about this, it blows my mind. We can read something that was written 2,000 years ago, and it is like a teleportation device. It's a way of a mind from long ago speaking directly into our brains. If I write something down on a page, if I say the red apple sat on the table or the submarine surfaced and launched its missile, that's in your head. I wrote it down on a piece of paper. You take these little squiggly lines on a piece of paper right here, you read them and it goes into your head, and it's a direct transference of knowledge. It's probably as close to magic as anything human beings have ever come up with. I also read the work during this time period of Studs Terkel, who's a huge influence on me. Studs Terkel was an actor and a radio broadcaster out of Chicago, and he wrote a book called Working, where he interviewed people, I believe it was like in the 1960s, about what they did for a living. Again, you get to hear directly from them. You get to hear what their thoughts are about their livelihood and what they learned by doing their job. He also wrote a book about veterans of World War II called The Good War. He also wrote a book, same thing, where he interviewed people about going through the Depression called Hard Times. And so all of these oral histories made a huge, huge impact on me. I didn't realize it at the time, but when I saw my friend sitting there in the living room of our apartment covered in dust from the Twin Towers, I thought, oh my God, somebody has to be writing this down. And the thing is, I don't know if you've ever gone through, an experience that just completely rocks your world, just completely upends everything that you know about life. Well, September 11th had that effect on me. I was in my, late 20s at the time, and the nation had just been attacked. That had never happened before. We didn't know what to expect. We had no idea. We thought civilization was going to end in those first few days. It was just mind-blowing. And so my way of getting through that, in retrospect, this is all very clear to me, was to give myself a job. I could not get this out of my head. I needed to understand what had happened. And more importantly, I needed to understand how people were getting through it, because basically I wanted to know how I could get through it. It's very selfish like that, but it seemed to work, not only for me, but also for the people I eventually talked to. And so I made it kind of like my personal mission. I went out on the streets of New York and I just started talking to people. I would see a cop and I would say, were you down there? And he'd say yes. And I'd say, well, could you spare 10, 15 minutes and tell me what happened? I would talk to firefighters. I would talk to people on the street who clearly had been, volunteering at the time. And then the whole thing began to snowball. Once people learned what I was doing, they kind of thought, well, that's a good idea. Well, if you think my story is very unusual or unique or worth preserving, would you talk to my friend who is a paramedic? Or would you talk to my friend who dropped everything? I mean, literally everything for like 2 months, and she organized a relief facility at Stuyvesant High School, which was directly down at Ground Zero. And so for a year and a half, I think after September 11th, 2001, I must have interviewed very close to 100 people. And I typed up everything that they told me, and of course then I began the editing process and I started moving things around, because when you talk to somebody, nobody speaks in a linear fashion. This video that you're watching right now has been edited, for instance, so I've taken little parts of it and I've moved it around here to make sense out of it. When I was finished with a piece, I would always give it back to the person and I'd say, here, is this correct? Is this what you would say if you weren't a human being and you weren't going all over on tangents? Do you approve of this? And if they said yes, well, then I would put it into the book. And if they said no, then I would work with them until we finally got something that they thought, that's me. I tried to capture each person's individual voice. I wanted to give people the experience of hearing in their skull, as they read these lines, these people who were right there at the time. That is what I thought the benefit of it was. And a lot of people said, well, why are you doing this? September 11th is such a horrible thing. It was an attack on the country, and it showed us at our weakest. And I said, no, it did not show us at our weakest. The way we responded to it showed us at our best. It brought home for me the notion that the only thing in life that we can ever control is ourselves. Sometimes shit happens to us. It just does. Horrible shit. Terrible, unnecessary, unforeseen, unjust stuff. Nobody can stop that. None of us can stop that. What we can do is control how we choose to respond to things. That's what I wanted that book to be about, and that's what it ended up being about. That's what I learned from it. That's why I'm proud of it. So let's get back to the part where how I got my first book published. I finished the book. I didn't know what to do with it. I had no contacts in the publishing industry. It sat there until probably another 3 years, and then I was working on another project. Someone had hired me. They thought that I was a decent writer. She was a former Miss Universe who had grown up in Africa. And I wrote kind of a little chapter of her life story, what later I would learn in the industry is called a book proposal. We were sitting in the office of the woman who eventually became my first literary agent. When the meeting finished, the agent came up to me and said, well, this is a really great project. I love this project, which eventually never went anywhere, by the way. A lot of times that happens in publishing. C'est la vie. But the agent said to me, what else have you got? I'd never even thought about that before because I didn't consider myself a professional writer. I consider myself a professional actor.
When you see your mama, you give her a kill for me too.
I didn't realize you could be both. And so I said, well, I've got this, it's weird. It's an oral history of 9/11. And she said, that's interesting. And I told her a little bit about the project, same way I just told you about it, but faster. And she said, well, let me see it. And so I gave it to her. Lo and behold, she had someone that she knew, a very, very small new publisher who was looking for just this kind of material. And that became this book right here. Towers Stories, the autobiography of September 11th, 2001. Now, before you go run right out and buy this, don't. The copy editing it's done really, like I said, it was a small publisher. They didn't really know what they were doing at the time. I was impressed that they really loved the material as much as I did. And then things started falling into place. William F. Buckley wrote a blurb for it. Politically, he and I were not exactly on the same side of the fence, but I did respect his erudition, and I certainly respected the work that he had done as a writer. And then it turns out that Tom Kane, who was one of the chairmen of the Independent 9/11 Commission, had been the president of my undergraduate university, as I mentioned, Drew University. And so I went to him and I asked him if he would feel comfortable endorsing what I had done, and he said yes. And so this book was published, and it was on the shelves for a couple of years. Then that company went out of business. Wah, wah, wah. Such things happen in publishing, especially when you're publishing your first book. But the agent and I did some clever finagling, and we got the rights to that book back, and we found a new publisher, Santa Monica Press, a boutique publisher out in California. They are a treasure. They only do things that they're very, very interested in. And they were very interested in this book from the get-go. And so they did this edition, which also you should not buy because I'm not getting paid for it currently. But this one did also very, very well. I liked the care that Santa Monica Press put into this particular book. Eventually, Easton Press, who does these fine leather-bound gold gilt copies for libraries like mine, they did a version of it, and that was lovely. And then finally, on the 20th anniversary of September 11th, the publishers contacted me again, and they said, hey, would you like to do some updated interviews? And I thought this was a fine idea. What would it be like if we went to people of note who could give us a look back on what had happened 20 years ago, how the world and how the country and how the culture have changed since September 11th, 2001. And so we came up with this version here. By this point, Publishers Weekly had weighed in on it, and Library Journal, and the New York Times, and MSNBC Today, and the book was getting really nice reviews. And for this one, we had Governor George Pataki, who was the governor of New York on the day that September 11th happened, do a new foreword. It's kind of a testament, I think, to the fact that when you write something, they may put it in bookstores, readers might read it all over the world, and it's still not finished, really. Every time somebody picks up that book and reads it, it has a new life. And secondly, many times, if the book has true legs, if it really has something behind it that is meant to span a few years, there will be new ways of looking at that material that different generations will want to respond to in different ways. I have a 10-year-old son. He has no recollection of those events because he wasn't born yet. And at last check, fully 34% of the United States population was not alive during September 11th, 2001, or was of an age where, they were 1 or 2 years old. They don't really have any firm recollections of what that was like because they were too young. So as time moves on and does its trick on all of us, my hope is that this book is going to serve as a touchstone for those days. Today we call it the post-9/11 world, and there's a good reason for that. A lot changed in that one Tuesday morning in September. But also to recall to people how so-called ordinary people did some of the most extraordinary things you or I, and perhaps even they, could have ever imagined. Just helping out somebody, a total stranger who was hurting next to them, dropping everything to make sandwiches, to dole out to the volunteers digging at ground zero, shipping food, socks, canned goods, dog food, driving it several states away to drop it off at the brink of the pit, not asking for any recognition, just doing it because it felt like the right thing to do. I don't see that event as a pro-American event. I don't see it as justification for the wars that eventually followed. I try to look at it as a purely human event. I know that these are lenses that everyone can look at the events through. I'm not interested as much in that as I am in the humanity that ties us together as human beings. That's what I hoped the book would transmit, and if it has, I'm very grateful for that. After that first book was published, a very strange thing began to happen. I began to publish a lot more. People would come to me and they'd say, "So you've written books?" And I'd say, "Yes, I have." And they'd say, "Well, can you write a book with me?" And I would say, I'm working on something else right now, but yeah, let's see if we can work it out. And a career was born. A lot of the books I've published have my own name on them, and 4 or 5 times that don't have my name anywhere on them, but that's okay with me. It's good work. It's interesting work. I like it. And it's given me a good life. So now I feel very naked, incredibly vulnerable, as I usually do when discussing this book. And I'd like to bring the conversation back around to something that is far more interesting: how you can publish your first book. The only advice that I think that I have for you, the advice that I would have for any artist of any stripe, a sculptor, a painter, an actor, a musician, a writer, a director, find the project that you cannot stop thinking about, that you practically obsess about, or that you do obsess about. The thing that propels you to get out of bed every single morning, or after you finish your long day of work paying the rent, propels you to go back to the studio, to the typewriters in my case, to the dance floor, to the film editing suite. The thing that just won't let you go. Do that thing. It's calling you. Now you have to decide whether or not you're going to listen. Listen to it. Follow it. See where it leads you. I had no idea that I would have the life that I have now back then. I don't know what's going on tomorrow. The truth is, none of us do. So follow your passion. Learn from it every day. Drop all pretenses that you know what's going to happen, or you know what people are going to think, or any of that stuff. It's a mind f***. Just follow it. Listen and be led. That's how to write your first book. That's how to write any book, as far as I know. How to do anything creative. So, I hope this helps you. Thanks for watching. If you haven't done so already, please hit subscribe. It's somewhere down here on the thingamadoodle. You know how to do it. Until next time, my name is Damon DiMarco for CreateX3.com. Stay happy, stay healthy, and stay creative.